Hey, this is Julian with Drum and Stage back with you again here, and we've got Scott Logsdon back again from the Sonor Museum. And what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of put a lid on a can of worms. Um, I think there's a lot to look forward to with Sonor in the coming year, and we're going to talk about some things that affect that, and I think the conversation about the Chinese stuff and all that's gotten a little old. Um, you know, I think in a perfect world, we'd all like to see things like they were, back in the glory days or whatever. But I personally think we're in the golden age of gear again. And when you look around at things going on in the drum world and with guitars and all that, I mean, where have you ever had the quality and the variety that you've got now? And you know what? There's a reason for it, and there's a way that's working. And before I ramble on all morning or all afternoon, Scott, I appreciate you taking your time again, and welcome aboard, sir.
Glad to be here. Glad to be here.
So, moderating the museum like you did, this was a constant issue. This and slotted rods and all sorts of things. So just to kind of get us kicked off here, do you want to chime in on things?
Okay, first of all, slotted rods. Now, I understand why they ended up offering square rods because everybody else uses them. And you have people that didn't want to have to carry around an extra drum key just to do things. Myself, I'm a slotted rod guy, and I still carry around two drum keys. And if I happen to forget my keys, at least I can tune my drums with a quarter. You know,
Yeah.
so I understand that it was just one way of getting rid of one of those niggling little things that have a chance, have a tendency to immediately turn somebody off. Like saying I don't like pink drums, I wouldn't buy pink drums. Well, I don't like slotted rods.
Yeah.
Why would they put slotted rods there? But getting to where you were doing in your introduction, we ended up on the museum, we ended up having some very vocal people that did not like at all the fact that there were drums and components being made in China. And hey, this just in, everybody has components made in China.
Hey,
uh,
let me throw something out there. The Lodge company that makes the cast iron cookware, they're 125 years old. And I read a thing a while back. They send their stuff for enameling goes to China. Guess why?
I would imagine that we probably have an EPA situation here or something along those lines.
Well, you know what? I was kind of hoping you were going to guess because of the cost, but
No.
you're actually correct. You're actually correct. They couldn't find anybody in the United States to do it for any price. So, those are factors that factor in, and I'm sure we'll get all of this, here shortly anyway. But, there's a lot of environmental stuff that has to do with this whole mess. And but go back to the track you were on.
Well, for one thing, everybody uses Chinese components just as a matter of cost, and it doesn't, just because it's from China doesn't necessarily mean that it's cheap or shoddy or any of this. When Sonar, back in about '98, I think, is when they first went over to Taiwan, and they took the molds and everything for the Force Series hardware. And the very first Force 2001, which came out in '99 or 2000, somewhere around there, was basically, a copy of the Force 2000, 3000 stuff that was made in Germany for the previous 10 years.
Right.
Uh, but with some cost cutting measures. For one, they were using Asian shells. I'm not exactly sure if my memory is correct. They were using basswood shells, which I guess basswood is a common furniture wood used in China and in Asia. And they were making the hardware there in either Taiwan or in China. I think they were probably making the hardware components in China already, but the stuff was just not really there. if you remember the Sonor Internationals from the late 80s, those were blatantly just Asian components kind of slapped on some Luan drums with phonic lugs and and Sonor badges on there. And for what they were, they were okay. It was a good beginner kit, but the whole thing was just in order to meet a price point. I mean, Pearl has always, even back when they were what they called a stencil maker. They had their own line, but then they ended up making drums for all kinds of other jobbers and distributors around the world to sell as their own brand. So you had Whitehall and you had Apollo, and although Apollo was Hoshino Star / Tama, but that company was doing the same thing. So they were making drums for export so that they could rebrand them for Sears, Monkey Wards, any of the rest of these companies. But getting back to the point, all of these companies were trying to make a full line at all price points, and you can't get a beginner into your brand when the lowest price kit you have is $4,000, and that's really what it boils down to. Back in the 70s, Sonor was able to do that in house with the Action and the Ranger and the Swinger sets. They ended up compromising on the shell a little bit. The hardware wasn't as robust, so they were able to bring the price down. But eventually, by the time the Tamas and the Pearls started flooding the United States, everybody's biggest market, they weren't going to be able to compete. So they started moving toward, well, let's see, how we can get some of these components made somewhere else for cheaper. So you fast forward up to 99, 2000, Sonor sent a guy, Uli, and I was just trying to find his name. I remember they just called him Mr. Uli. They sent him to China at the KHS plant to teach them how the German way of things is done. Because you and I both remember Mapex drums when they first came out, and I wasn't impressed at all.
I wasn't.
I thought they were trying to, basically just trying to copy Tama. But so the stuff that they had on their assembly line, they set up totally separate assembly line for the Sonor Force series stuff. And they, with separate shell molds, and their stuff was not interchangeable at all. I'm sure that's probably changed now, because the Chinese, as the Chinese do, once they get a hold of new techniques and new technology, then they adopt it as their own. So they had the German guy there showing them, okay, this is how we make the shells. This is how we do the plating. Because that was probably the biggest thing right there, was that it became just horrendously inefficient and too expensive to do the plating and metal manufacture in-house, whether it be at the Sonor factory, which I think they ended up buying stuff from a foundry like the lugs and clamps and that stuff, but they did the plating in-house. But by the mid 90s, it got to the point with the German EPA that they just couldn't do it, so they had to outsource it. So the best idea was to send somebody from Germany to China and show them, okay, this is how we want it done. I know you've been doing it this way for all these years, but not to offend, but the way you do it sucks. So here is the right way to do it. This is the way that we want it done. And it took a good 4 or 5 years before they really kind of got a handle on it. I tend to think that the Force drums didn't really start getting passable until about the 3005 series in 2005. So about a 5-year span there where they were just learning. And I remember seeing, I think I still have the video up on the museum, where they're showing how they ended up cleaning the metal parts for plating, where they put some kind of ceramic cones or something in there, and they would just dump the lugs and stuff in there and tumble them around, kind of like lapidary, like if you wanted to polish rocks, the same sort of thing. So they would tumble the stuff in there. Whereas before, the Chinese they'd take the lugs, they might wash them a couple of times, and then they'd plate them. Well, there's still all kinds of impurities and things on there that are going to keep the different metals from sticking to the plating, and so eventually, within just a couple of years, either the chrome is going to peel off, or it's going to bubble, or it's just not going to last. But you remember how the signature series stuff was, the plating on that. I've had stuff that has gone through floods. I mean, literally gone through floods. Mm-hmm. And I didn't get around to cleaning it up until a couple of years afterwards, and it still looked like brand new after I power washed it. So that has a lot to do with the preparation and attention to detail.
Right.
I hope that kind of answers something.
Sure. Well, and in Modern Drummer, I don't remember what year it was, but they actually went to the Chinese factory, and they were in awe that the workers over there were finding little flaws in some of these detailed parts, but they weren't even seeing the attention to detail. And I've always said this about the Chinese man. I don't, what continent something's done on is irrelevant. If you've got the engineering, you've got the production to pull it off, and the quality control to make sure it's all going properly. You could move production to Mars, and the production's going to be as good as you require it to be.
Right.
And that's the point I think people miss. There's such a stigma because early on you were seeing garbage coming over from some of these countries, and we got stigmatized. Well, if it's coming from there, it's just not up to par.
Well, you're not as old as I am, but I can remember when, if stuff came from Japan, it was considered to be crap.
Right.
And it generally was. But then they started, really, really coming up with some different ideas in automobiles and in electronics. And the next thing you know, like Marty McFly said, "What do you mean? That's where all the good stuff comes from." Mm-hmm. And slowly but surely, it just kind of it migrates. But there again, as their quality improves, then of course their price increases, and there's always a demand for the cheap stuff that's gonna fall apart, just because of having it at a price point. I know that when I sat in on meetings with the Sonor dealers and distributors, they consistently talked about having something to sell at different price points. So even if, like, for example, the Martini kit, when that was released, it had a retail price of $4.99, which, I mean, is amazing in any time. Back in the '60s, it still ended up costing at least $300 for a run-of-the-mill generic pearl Japanese drum kit from Sears. I guess they probably call it a silver tone. But there was that price point. Sears wasn't going to end up selling a $3,000 Sonorlite kit, right. But they sure as hell sold a lot of those rebranded pearl kits for sure. So Sonor ended up having to do that at the same time, and they ended up teaching the Chinese, okay, here's good, better, best, the 1,000, the 2,000, the 3,000, that sort of thing, and you can see where the compromises are made. I bought a 3007 kit, and it has combination Canadian and Chinese maple shells, but it's all maple. Mm-hmm. The hardware is pretty much the same on all of them, although on the lowest rung of the Chinese stuff, they use different lugs. So like even the 01s, the 2001, the 3001, and I think maybe the 1001 all use the same lugs, which were kind of like a rounded Chevy emblem. Mm-hmm. But they had a 501, which used sort of a generic looking lug, almost like a mini Gretsch lug.
Well, it was a rockwood.
Mm-hmm.
I used to sell them when I had my Sonar dealership, and
Right,
I always called them rockweed. So just out of I'm a goofball, so I had to make myself think and not call them rockweed. But
right,
they shared a lot of common components, the rockwood and the 501s,
right.
which actually I feel like led to confusion because it's kind of funny when you talk to people. I walked into a drum store one day, well, a music
Mhm.
store. I don't remember where I was at. It's been years, but there was a rockwood sitting there. And sometimes I'll just like to play with somebody and see what they know. And I say, hey, what do you know about this? He said, well, that's made by Sonar. And I wasn't going to go into it, but no, it's not, it's not a Sonar drum rebranded by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
But I think there's been some confusion that comes from things like that, where you've got shared components between two distinct brands.
Right.
Um, and then kind of building a little bit on or going another direction altogether, really. Uh, every now and then I'll ask somebody what their impression of Sonar is. Well, when you get online and look, if you're not like somebody like us, we know what we want to go look for. But a lot of these stores, your Guitar Centers and your musicians' friends, they've got the AQX, the AQ1s. So I wonder if to a degree they haven't sort of diminished the value of the brand in the fact that there's so much visibility of the lower lines and not so much of the higher end stuff.
Well, here is the beauty of them sending the German guy over to China. I mean, he lived there for like 2 years, and was there working side by side with these people, showing them how to do it, correcting them when they got it wrong, making sure to point out when they got it right. So the point is being able to have that stair step. And you got your entry level, and the car dealers or car companies have been doing this for years. They have their entry model, and then they wanted to get you into their deluxe model as you ended up getting quality demand, sort of thing. And it was much the same thing. The trick was, though, to make that lower end stuff of the same sort of build quality as the higher end stuff.
Hmm.
So I'm not going to say that an AQ2 or an AQ1 is identical quality wise to an SQ2 or a ProLite. No, because they're using better quality materials, but the way they're put together is virtually the same because you had the German guy there training them how to do it. So you end up having somebody who can afford to buy an AQ2, and hopefully 10 years down the line they're going to be ordering an SQ2 kit with all of the bells and whistles.
I would have to wonder how long it took him to learn the phrase, we've always done it this way in Chinese. I used to work for a factory. We built aircraft, agricultural aircraft, and, wound up going under because everybody's mentality was, we've always done it this way. We were trying to get ISO certified and ramp up things and kind of join the modern world. But you had such an old mentality and, it wound up breaking the company.
Well, unfortunately, time marches on, and innovation marches on, and chemistry and engineering and all of the rest of these things. We're if everybody had held to, well, we've all done it this way, everybody would still be driving Ford Model Ts,
Right.
and eating spam sandwiches for lunch. But no, it comes along that way, and that's in addition to being able to have the full product line. We also have to kind of move over to like the all of the hardware, even the high end hardware is made in China, or at least the components are made in China. I remember David Schultz correcting me one time when I was at the factory, and we were with a group of distributors. I was just kind of tagging along, and we were watching them uh, put together 600 series stands. And so I said, so these are made in Germany? And he very, very quietly just kind of said, assembled in Germany, yeah. So
Right.
yeah, but it's because, the cost of just getting the plating done. I mean, if anybody who's into restoring cars or a Harley nut or something like that knows just how ridiculously expensive it is to get chrome plating done for car parts. And I mean, that's the same thing for drum parts. So there again, the German guy ended up showing them, all right, we'll use your pipe. We want to make sure that it's the proper grade of pipe and the proper sizes of pipe. But here's how you have to clean it. This is how you have to prep it before you start plating it. And we want you to nickel plate it, and then we want you to copper plate it, and then you chrome plate it, and you wash it and you polish it in between each of those steps. At least with the ones that you're going to send back to Germany for us to sell, for $250 a stand. This is just how it has to be done.
Well, that brings up something else too. I think I was still a dealer when the 5000 series was replaced by the 600 series. And I remember there was a huge price decrease
Mm-hmm.
when the 600 series came out. Matter of fact, I called Buzz King and I said, "Hey, have you seen the new 600 series?" And he said, "I don't even understand how they're doing that." Well, we understand now how they were doing that. But
Right.
but when you look at how the pricing was on the old stuff, if that had kept ratcheting up and up and up, nobody would want to be buying
Oh yeah.
new stands at those prices.
Oh yeah, if everything were still made in Germany, I mean, if they were just doing the 600 series and completely sourcing everything there in Germany, a snare drum stand would cost you $500, and
Yeah,
there's nobody's going to pay $500 for a drum for a snare drum stand. It's
you
just
know,
it's just happening,
I think it was
especially when everybody else is having theirs made in China and they're selling it, selling their super deluxe one for 250.
right.
So that's just how, and that's also the other thing about it. Not only, I remember when they move the 4 series stuff over to Asia first in Taiwan and then to China proper, but they ended up sending all of the hardware molds and stuff over there too. So I still have a bunch of Force 3000 drums and Force 3000 hardware. And I had the price list from like 1997. And if I were to pull it up, I don't want to cover your face up,
Right.
but if I were to pull it up, in 1997, a Force 3000 snare stand would have had a retail price of like $260 or $300 or something like that. Of course, if you knew somebody, you could probably get it for $1.99 or something like that. But then in 2000 or 2001, when they moved it over there, they were still building the same stand. I mean, it functionally and visually identical. Uh, the price dropped by a third, so you could get that same stand for like $1.25 or $1.50 instead of $2.50. Which, hey, and I bought them. I bought a couple of snare stands. I bought a couple of other things. The one thing that I noticed, though, was that with that particular item, the Force 3000 snare stand that was built in Germany, they ended up riveting the basket to the top of it. On the Chinese one, and I ended up finding this out the hard way. I had it on a gig, and I was tightening the thing down, and I'm playing, and all of a sudden, the snare and the basket just fell off the stand because they pressed it on. It wasn't riveted; it was just pressed on. I guess they figured the interference fit was going to be enough, but no. So I had to put that on there, and I ended up making noise about it on the board, and lo and behold, within about 6 months they started riveting that one particular part. So that was kind of I don't know that they didn't come to that conclusion on their own, but I did like that making noise about it did bring about change, even though we didn't get really acknowledged for at least another 5 years.
Right. Well, speaking of hardware, that's another area where things have come along, have changed a lot in 40, 45 years. Um, personally, years ago when I was a lot younger, the biggest, heaviest stuff was kind of intriguing. When I'm going out on a gig right now, if I could if I could take a pack of pencils to put my cymbals on, I'd have a quick loadout. And
Yeah.
that's the way I think about things. But the current hardware I think is very ample, adequate, whatever word you want to use.
Mm-hmm.
If they came out with a new revamped line of old signature stuff, they'd probably sell hi-hat stands pretty good, but I'm not sure there'd be a market for, a cymbal boom stand you could hang a Volkswagen off of.
Right, 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 right. That kind of, it made me think of one of the arguments I used to try to rebut with on the board with some of the people. Said, well, they need to bring back the signature series drums and the hardware and everything. Is like we already covered, as far as the hardware goes. All right, so if you wanted a signature series boom stand, with the levers and all the rest of that stuff, are you willing to pay $600 for that boom stand? It's going to be absolutely fantastic, but are you willing to pay that? As far as the signature series drums go, all right, with 12-ply beach shells and inner and outer veneer of Babinga or Macassar ebony, and are you willing to pay $3,000 for a 24-inch bass drum? Because
That's
that's what it's
probably
going to cost.
that's conservative.
Yeah.
That'd be a very conservative price.
I mean, granted, you can option out I mean, just a typical 4-piece SQ2 kit. One mounted tom, a floor tom, a bass drum, and a snare drum, easily, approaches 35 to $4,000, if not more.
It's going to be more, and I know that because I just put together some stuff in the configurator for somebody for something else.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean and I think it was and I forget what the figures were, but I do think those are low.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just depending on what the how the exchange rates end up going over the next few years, we'll find out. Is the dollar going to be weaker? Is the dollar going to be stronger? The first time I went to Germany, it cost $1.45 to buy €1. So basically, the dollar was devalued by almost 50%.
Wow, yeah.
And so for one, if you wanted to buy a Ludwig Superphonic, it would cost you $400, and the same kind of drum from Germany, even though it was the same amount of euros, by the time it got sent over here, it was $600. You can't compete under those kind of circumstances. So there again, that's the necessity of globalization. You don't want nobody really wants to acknowledge it, but the Chinese person of 2000 to 2010 was willing to work for a tenth of what a German or an American were willing to work for, doing the same thing. So if you end up getting to where the actual product that they're making is on a par with what you were making in the mother country, but you're able to cut down that labor cost, which is a substantial amount of it. I'd say at least 30%. Then you're ahead of the game. Even when you're factoring in transportation, like you were saying with Lodge, it's cheaper for them to go ahead and take the cast iron that they make here in the United States, sit it on a boat, pay to ship it over to China, have them go ahead and do the enamel coating of it, then stick it back on a boat, send it all the way back over here again.
Mm-hmm.
That's really saying something.
Right. Yep.
But then at
And
the same time, why does it end up costing $140 to ship a snare drum to France? Because that's what I just had to do this past
shipping's
week.
outrageous right now.
Oh, it's completely ridiculous. And remember when I'm trying to remember, in the early 2000s, gas ended up going up, having a big spike. I think maybe it was because of the Iraq War. I'm not exactly sure, but UPS ended up introducing a fuel surcharge,
Yeah, I remember.
which still is there. They didn't remove that fuel surcharge when gas went down to $1.99 a gallon, cheaper than where it was before they had the fuel surcharge. No, that's remained on there. It's just crazy. It's just crazy.
Yeah. You know, thinking about companies moving forward and all that, the one exception would be Gretsch. They
Mm-hmm.
very deliberately do things the same way they did back in their golden age. Not that this isn't, a continuation or a new one for them on that too, but um, they've got a particular era that they still make that drum. That's still their specialty.
Yeah.
Um, and you just don't, that's very uncommon that you see a company that just deliberately stays stuck, a half a century ago.
Well, at least they've had to up their game as well in order to keep the quality on a par with the rest of the competitors, because anybody who is familiar with both Gretsch and Ludwig drums, Gretsch back in the 50s was the choice of the jazz guys. But the quality of the drums coming out of their Brooklyn factory at times was horrendous. There were drums that were packed and shipped that didn't have bearing edges cut on the bottoms of the shelves, or that were missing particular pieces of stuff. But the sound and the mystique that Philly Joe Jones and Max Roach and those guys put into that product, they were able to get away with it. And then the same thing ended up happening in the 60s with Ludwig after the Beatles broke huge. The Ludwig factory was cranking out drums 24/7. And they were making them faster than the demand. If you ordered a kit, it was kind of like ordering an SQ2 almost. It would take several months from the time you ordered a Ludwig kit until you got it. And a lot of the stuff from like 64, 65, 66, there were drums that were coming out of the door and showing up at your house that were oval. They were not round, but they just figured, well, that's just part of the character of the drum. The drum set I learned to play on was a 65 Ludwig Super Classic kit in silver sparkle, and there wasn't a round drum amongst them. Especially with the mounted tom, you really had to tweak and everything in order to get it right. And I really didn't know anything about tuning at that point in time. I was, sticking tape and buying, foam dead ringers, these foam rings that stuck underneath the head, and didn't even use a bottom head, just because I wanted that 70s sound that was all popular back at that time. But both Gretsch and Ludwig have had to up their game since Tama and Pearl ended up coming on the horizon, and were stealing their customers away from them by putting out a superior product at a lesser price. So that forced them to make sure that their shells were round, and that the hardware didn't rattle, and that the stands were substantial and didn't strip out, at the slightest tightening and that kind of stuff. And so that's, Sonor, on the other hand, has always kind of gone for the high ground, even with their low end stuff back in the 70s, going back to the Ranger and the and the action and the swinger stuff. So they ended up using thinner shells, but they were still made by the same guys. They're in Iowa in the same ovens using the same techniques. So they ended up, using a 3-ply shell instead of a 6-ply shell, for example. They decided that maybe we should, we'll use plastic lugs. So those of us who remember those lines, they had plastic lugs that looked a lot like Ludwig lugs. And people ended up finding out over a few years, if you crank down on them, they'd go ahead and disintegrate easily. But so as time passed, when the Phonics series was introduced in 1976, I'm going to say, they ended up making the Champion series their lower line. So they ended up using, basically using the thinner shells on the Champions and the thicker shells on the Phonics, and some different specs to differentiate them. Eventually, as time went on, they would start using the old parts on the lower drums and the new parts on the new stuff.
Now explain what you mean by old parts and new parts.
Okay, for example, if you look at a 1970s or even going back to a late 60s Sonor teardrop kit, on the floor toms, they used a particular clamp that it attached to the shell with two bolts. And then also just the design of it was they had these two heavy metal castings and a screw that went through, well, actually two, one that held the thing together and another one that tightened it down. But they ended up just machining a threaded hole into one of them, and they used a wing nut to tighten the thing down. Well, they come to find out as time went on and people were tightening the thing down, that it would end up eating the threads out of that casting. So by about 1979, 1980 or so, they changed that part for the Phonics and then eventually the Sonor Light and the Signatures, to where it was still two great big metal castings, but it was held to the drum with 3 screws, and there were holes drilled all the way through it. So you had a screw and a bolt holding the top section to it, and then you had another bolt sticking all the way through and a wing nut that tightened it down in order to clamp things down on there. So if anything was going to get worn out, it was going to be that screw or that wing nut, not the entire casting. I mean, if you go on eBay and you need to find those old clamps, you really got to watch, because I would venture to say 85% of them, all of the threads are gone on the inside. And that's the reason that the people are looking for replacements anyway, because I've ended up coming up with a fix for it, to where you end up putting a 6mm stud in there and Loctite it with the threads that are left in the thing. And then you use a wing nut. Basically, it upgrades it to the newer design. So that's what they were doing on the lower lines. As they went forward, they ended up using the stock of those old parts that they had left on the lower lines. So you ended up seeing that like on the Champion series, they used the little wing nuts, or the wing nuts that were basically just a piece of stamped metal with a hole drilled in it, threaded, as opposed to a cast, the cast part that looked like this. And that's what they used all the way up until the Performer series. So they used those on the block mount. They used it on the it's hell getting old. They used it on the floor tom leg clamps. They used it on the wing screws for the tom mounts. That was just something they already had them there, so might as well use them up. We've already, They're not costing us anything to use.
Hmm.
Also, at that same time, they kind of did the same thing that Pearl was doing back in the 60s with the rebranding. They ended up offering a champion series in the early 80s that was quite literally just a Pearl slash CB700. That's probably the one that you ended up seeing a lot of the time. It was one of those kits with Sonor badges on it, but they sold it in the catalogs that was the ORF and school and education series of drums. There again, to meet a price point,
Hmm.
I mean, kids aren't going to appreciate a uh, a mahogany phonic bop kit, which is what they used to advertise in those catalogs 4 years earlier. So they end up selling the Asian made one in there, and it's still going to have about the same kind of half life. The kids are going to end up tearing it up within, I'd say, 6 or 7 or maybe 10 years, and of course the phonic kit will last longer than that, but it'll have just as many battle scars on it.
Right. Gotcha. So going forward, I know there's, we got the 150th anniversary coming up and all that, and that whole thing's a mystery to me. And I think you've got some inside information you can't divulge, but at any rate, either way, how do you feel like the international production influences what we get product wise as consumers and as fans of the brand?
Well, for one, I am greatly heartened that even though Carl has retired, and there is a Chinese gentleman who is there, I guess, overseeing. I haven't met him because I haven't been to the NAMM shows. Hopefully, within the next couple of years, I can start attending again. Uh, but so we have somebody, handpicked by KHS instead of handpicked by Horst Link to oversee things. However, he appreciates and honors the fact that the history and the way of doing things adds a particular mystique and value, and so it's best not screwed with.
Mhm.
So they have, from some of the pictures I've seen, they've updated a few of the shell ovens, but for the most part, the stuff in Germany is still, for the most part, handmade. There are some things that are automated, but the shells, they measure and cut those things by hand, and they adjust for differences in temperature and such over the days. I need to ask one of my friends over there, because I remember seeing where they were over the day they would change the measurements. I don't know whether it had to do with the heat that the ovens were putting out, or whether there was a change in the humidity making the dimensions of the wood change, but they would end up using different calculations over the day to make sure that all of the seams ended up butting perfectly together, which you wouldn't see that somewhere else. And this is all done, uh, by humans, not by machines. They're hand laying all of this stuff up together. However, when they get done with the shells, they put them on a machine that drills all of the lug holes and all of that stuff. So there's automation where handmade as usual, but automation where it's needed,
Well, I
sort of
went
thing.
on a I went on a jag buying a lot of Gretsch gear a few years ago. Had some custom made stuff and all that, and they hand drill everything,
Mm-hmm.
and they screw up a lot of
Yeah,
stuff. And
yeah,
I ordered a Brooklyn drum set, and the two lugs on the top of the front of the bass drum, one of them was cocked over, and wasn't that big of a deal. They went to go install a tom mount on the bass.
right.
Then it really stuck out. So if that was anything that I'm glad would be automated, that would be
Yeah,
it. So there's no virtue in a human having to take a jig and manually not slip and not make a mistake. I'm all about we want perfection. That's what we're paying for. We're buying
I mean,
German
I know
drums.
some, I know some guys that are what I guess we would call boutique uh, operators, like Bill Dedamore at Pork Pie, and Ron Dennett at Dennett and George Way. And yes, they do hand drill things, but they have a system where they check it like 3 or 4 times. There is no eyeballing something like that and say, that's close enough.
Right.
No, you gotta have those measurements, you know, exactly right, or otherwise you're going to end up what you just described. I'm reminded of a time back in the mid aughts when I was at NAM, and Orange County Drum and Percussion was like, the hot new ticket, with their 75 ply killer shells, which were basically just several shells pounded into one another. They weren't laid up that way to begin with, and with the ridiculous holes drilled in the sides of them for the venting and all that. So they had this great big display of all of their different drums, and it was still the same thing that you were talking about with the Gretsch. It was like they had wraps that had horizontal stripes, but at the seam the stripes didn't meet, or lugs that were cockeyed, and this is the stuff that they have on display that they're trying to sell to. I guess they just figured, well, we're the hottest name right now, so these idiots will buy anything. And I guess they were right for a certain number of years until they weren't.
Right.
So going forward, Sonor and all of the serious drum companies. That's probably the main thing, is that there are boutique manufacturers, there are niche manufacturers, and then there are mass marketers. Sonor is kind of like sticking in between those two, at least in spirit. Yes, they're offering a mass market product, but with the same sort of attention to detail of a boutique dealer. Mm-hmm. So that's why you can go ahead and buy an AQ2 kit with confidence and know that those lugs are going to be straight, the shells are going to be round. Every 500th drum there might be some kind of mishap with it. There might be a rim where the plating isn't just quite right, or maybe they had a shift change and somebody didn't make the shell exactly right. But that's the great exception rather than expectation.
Right.
That you would automatically, oh, it's from China, so there's going to be something cheap about it. I mean, I played the Martini kit. I played the prototype Martini kit that Larry Nelson and the guys at Honer USA ended up putting together, which eventually ended up becoming a worldwide thing. But they ended up initially just doing that for the U.S. market in order to meet a price point and also a need. And the reason they called it the Martini was because it was a new twist on the cocktail kit. So I thought that was cool. But in playing that 14-inch bass drum, an 8-inch mounted tom, I think it had a 13-inch floor tom, or maybe it was a 12. I can't remember for sure. But that thing, it sounded like a Sonor. And I really can't, only guys that have been playing Sonor for years and then go back and forth and play other kits, there's just something about the Sonor sound, which is, basically what the trademark Sonor means. It's Latin for sound. So going forward, Sonor has figured out that they have to maintain that quality level in order to maintain their customer base, because there's a lot of good stuff out there. Pearl is making some tremendous drums. Tam is making some tremendous drums. Even Ludwig is making some really good drums. Gretsch they're having hiccups here and there, but for the most part, they do rely on that mystique. And I don't know whether it's the silver paint inside or whether it's the layer of gum for the middle ply in the shells, but there is that certain mystique as well with them.
Right. So, kind of a two-part question here, or maybe a statement, then a question. We'll figure this out as we go.
Okay.
Um, there was a time where every year something changed in the product line. Every odd year, it was either the Asian stuff or the German stuff, and then alternately, it was the other. Um, things have kind of felt more like on autopilot. I mean, you've seen new SQ1 colors, the white come out and all that. The Pro Light's gone away, and I think it's leaving production altogether. But it hasn't been available in the States routinely for quite a while,
Mhm.
other than the snare drums. Do you feel like they've kind of coasted with the product line for a while?
No, I think it's a deliberate. It used to be that they had a big presence at all of the big trade shows. Music Messe in Frankfurt in March or April, the NAM show in January, and the Shanghai music show in I think it was in October, either September or October. And that was a big worldwide thing with a lot of press and a lot of eyes on it. And so I think it was kind of given that you had to have something new, even if it's a new design for the wing nuts. You had to show something new. Um, but like on the Chinese drums, they changed them every 2 years. So like
Still do.
there was Force 3001, then there was
Right.
Force 3003, then Force 3005, then 3007, and they changed those every 2 years. And there was a change in the shell makeup, and in the finishes, in the lugs. Basically, they ended up changing everything with those every couple of years. I think part of that was because the German guy was training the Chinese guys how to do it, and with each iteration, the quality got just a little bit better. I think it got to where it needed to be by the 3007 series in 2007. Uh, but that being said, about about 2011 or 2012, I'm not exactly sure. Well, let's see. I went to Mesa in 2012. They brought me out to man their vintage display, which that was just tremendous. That particular year, uh, they had Uli Frost, who is a member of the Sonar Museum, and he runs a music school and a recording complex in Paderborn, Germany. He had bought Chester Thompson's signature kit from the uh, from Phil Collins, the Genesis and Phil Collins tour of like 10 years earlier. And so he had this kit on display, and it was this wonderful double bass uh, Sonar signature in Bubinga with the shine. I guess basically it was a Sega SE kit, with the gloss finish Bubinga from 8 all the way down to 18, and the big bronze snare drum and the big bronze wood snare drum, and all of the matching hardware, and all of this stuff. That was the last year that Sonar uh, appeared at Mesa. Carl ended up telling me that the budget that they ended up having to expend just to do at that show was equal to doing China and NAM. So they decided to not do Mesa. They ended up doing their own thing in Awa, Sonar Days, a 3-day extravaganza there at the factory with performances and factory tours and I guess basically a festival. And I'm not sure I know that they did it that one year. I think they did it a couple more years after that, but it cost them way less to do that than to do Missa. So at the same time, the internet had basically kind of taken over to the point where going to these shows is not as necessary as it used to be. I mean, the main thing for the shows now is just to glad hand with the distributors, and it's cheaper to send those guys a plane ticket and have them come and visit you, and you wine and dine them for a couple of days, and give them a presentation at the factory, as opposed to gathering all of this stuff and all of these people and shipping on all the way over from Germany over to NAM, and getting just the logistics of it are horrendously expensive, just getting there, and then the price of admission. I can't remember what Ron told me just for his little space to display at NAM, which was a little spot, probably about 8 feet wide by 10 feet deep, big enough for a chair, a drum set, and a couple of racks of snare drums. They were charging him something like $15,000 for that amount of space.
Wow.
And so they priced them. The trade shows have priced themselves out of existence, or at least priced themselves into irrelevancy. Now to the point where it's only worth going for these big companies, and KHS is a big company, so they have Mapex, and they have Sonor, and they have Jupiter trombones, and they've got all kinds of other stuff. So it makes sense for them, or it makes sense for Selmer with Ludwig and all of their saxophones and their full line stuff. It makes sense for them to go ahead and show up. But now it doesn't make sense for the smaller manufacturers to even do it. It's just prohibitively expensive. So getting back to, well, why are they on kind of on autopilot? Well, they're not necessarily on autopilot. They're back to, for the most part, well, what new are we going to do this year? Well, we can change the design of the wing nuts, because for what it's worth, the SQ2s are still, they've been out for, this is 20, coming on 20, they've been out for 18 years now. Mm-hmm. And they're still just as competitive, if not better, than the Pearl Masters series, or the Tamastar Classics, or any of the rest of the ones where they have a custom, a custom option to build them. They're still right there with them. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they can offer a few more options. All right, we want to, we've got what was the one they came out with a couple years ago, the African Marble, which I think is a gorgeous veneer, and it's a natural veneer, not an Aldi veneer, for all of you nitpickers. The reason that they ended up going to the engineered veneers was because the Macassar ebony, it was classified as endangered. Mm-hmm. And just like the Brazilian rosewood and the African bubinga, the bubinga drums that are being made. Tama does a Pearl makes a line where they have bubinga shells. It's not the same stuff that you use for the veneer. That comes from an endangered species, and they just about logged it out. So that's why they ended up going to the Aldi or Alpi reproductions of those things, so that they could offer something that looks as nice, but you can get it at a price point. If they were to be able to offer the Macassar ebony, that they were offering back in the 80s, there again, that $3,000 SQ2 snare drum would end up being $5,000, just because it would cost that much to put the veneer on it.
Yeah, I don't know about on the ebony, but I know that on the bubinga, there were two distinct hues. One was more of a brown, and one was a little more reddish. And
Mhm.
so if you're trying to add on or buy orphans or whatever, it's a little bit of a crapshoot that you're going to find the perfect match to your drum set. And I think that's one benefit,
Oh yeah,
of
yeah,
the
absolutely.
Alpi.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. That was a big bugaboo from the time of, well, when they first started offering rosewood drums back in, back in the late '60s. See, I think it was, maybe it was '70 or '71. I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the catalog. But yeah, they had rosewood, and then they had a dark walnut that they offered in '70 or '71. And they even put the disclaimer: it's a natural product. There's going to be some variances and consistencies, but us sonar weenies don't pay any attention to those disclaimers, and especially if you ended up buying a kit, 10 years ago, that was 10 years old, and you wanted to have a 10-inch tom made for it.
Mm.
Chances are, it's not going to have the same kind of rosewood that if it was even available. But they ran into the same thing with the Bubinga on the signatures, and the Macassar ebony, and also on the Scandi birch on the Sonorlight drums. I have several. I've just embraced the fact that all of my drums look like they came from different kits, because they did. They were made at different times, and they used different finishes on the outside. On the early Sonorlights, they used the sealer that they used had like a yellowish tint to it. And then later on in the late '80s and early '90s, it was a clear tint. And if you put the drums side by side, you can see it immediately, even despite the fact that the veneer is, some of it has a lot of figuring in it, and others has not quite so much. Um, so the advantage you end up getting with the Alpi, at least on the Bubinga and the ebony, the fact that there's going to be a consistency of color and grain from batch to batch, you know, uh, and I'm sure that they can tell them, all right, we want you to make, this next batch of veneer. We want to make sure that it's the same looking stuff that you sold us 7 years ago, and they can do that. You can't necessarily do that with the natural veneer. One thing you might notice, that the Babinga that they were using on the early to mid '80s uh, signature drums was kind of like a quilted, it almost had like a scalloped kind of look to it. And then by the time they ended up getting to the end of the signature series and into the designer series, it was more like a wavy grain rather than that quilted veneer. So, there, and both of them were natural. They just were, I don't know whether they were sourcing different kinds of logs, or what the deal was, but there was that immediate change too, to where you had, where it was almost like blotches of, it kind of reminds me of like seashells on the old, where you had stacked seashells on the veneer, and then later on it was, a wavy kind of grain on it,
I have,
in addition to the color changes.
I've never noticed that, but I will definitely keep my eyes
Yeah,
open when I.
yeah. Take a look at the '80s catalogs, and then take a look at some of the later the designer, where they've got the Babinga option, and the difference is night and day, and it's still a natural product.
Well, moving along, because we're about an hour, a little over an hour with this. But I get a vibe that not just because of the 150th. I just think some changes that have happened anyway. I really get a vibe that we've got some good things coming. I think we're going to see a little bit of a shift with the tone, a little bit. Um,
I anticipate, and I do not know this. The only things that I know, that I know and am sworn to secrecy about, is about the display at NAMM. Uh, I know that for the 150th, they're really going out for the display, and that's all I can say. I shouldn't have even said that much. But I get the feeling there again, since they have discontinued the Pro Light, that's that's a notch in the product line that and a price point that needs to be filled. Kind of like what General Motors did with Chevrolet, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, Buick, Cadillac. So you got uh, AQ2, AQ1, uh, uh, Pro Light,
Mhm.
uh, SQ1, SQ2. That same sort of stair stepping in the product line. And so since they've removed something out of there, that just logically tells me that they've got something in mind to plug back in there. Now, is it going to be another shell made of maple with reinforcing rings, or who knows?
Well, I'll tell you what, as a consumer, I've always felt like there was a little bit of a gap between the Asian and the German stuff. And I'll just give an example. When I got back from New Hampshire last year, I went shopping for new gear, and the AQ1 attracted me, which I did wind up getting the AQ1. I love the way they sounded. And
Mhm.
got the 2000 series hardware, which is, Chinese all the way. I mean, it might have been developed and, designed or whatever in Germany. I don't know if they're doing that or not.
Right.
But even the 2000 series for what I do was very adequate hardware. Um, but anyway, the point is, I was also looking at Tama Star Classics, the walnut birch, and the reason I didn't get those to start with is because they were out of stock where I wanted to get them, where I could get the finance options. So
Right.
I went with AQ1s, and you know, for what the Star Classic offered, beautiful finish. The hardware. Have you looked at that stuff? The hardware is awesome. It's got integrated memory locks that lock into the mounts and all that on the floor tom legs and the tom brackets and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Very
haven't
well.
I haven't paid close attention to it, but yeah, that seems like
It's
a
great.
logical thing.
And it's like a black on off switch. It's just a plastic switch. When you get it in place, you flip the switch and you're done. There's no locking down the T
Huh.
rod and all that kind of stuff. But even the packaging and all that they did, you know, it looked like the guy that packaged that drum set planned to take it home and unpackage it himself. There was just a
Uh-huh.
lot of thought that went into it. Point is, at the time and now, Sonor doesn't have a product in that same price point with the same number of drums and the same options. And
Hmm.
I've just always felt like there was some room to play in between where the Chinese stopped and the Germans started. I don't know what I can sit here all day long and come up with these great ideas, but I don't know what the capacity at the
Yeah.
German plant is or the capacity at the Chinese plant.
Well, maybe there is something in mind if you're noticing that particular hole, uh, to where they could do something like the old Swinger series again. And there again, uh, go back and use the old parts that they still have lying around, uh, type of thing. A thinner shell. Maybe like a vintage series light made of, say, since the vintage series is made of beech, which it would seem to me that the beech is the obvious option because that's all sourced locally. I
You
mean,
know,
those forests around the Sonor factory. The reason they were using beech all of this time is because the wood is right there, right around the factory. They end up getting it from sawmills no more than 20 miles away.
and the I know the Ascent was Chinese made,
Mm-hmm.
but they were well received by anybody I heard talk about it. Everybody, and I had one and sold it to somebody. I hate that I can't remember who it was. It'll click later. But great sounding beach, heavy-ish shell.
Yeah.
So
Well,
last
they
time,
made them. They made them thick. They were almost as. I mean, I only saw them. I never played one. I saw them at the NAM show, and they had almost as thick as shells as the old phonic, didn't they?
right? Yeah, they
Yeah,
they were right. They were right. If they weren't there, they were mighty close to that same thickness.
yeah. So there's something to be said about just that particular the mass in itself. Uh, back in the day, horse link, was all about, having that shell being thick and immovable to where it didn't vibrate.
Right.
Whereas, I tend to think that that's just kind of marketing speak. All of them are going to vibrate to a certain degree. It used to be, back during the Champion Series back in about '74, where it still had the phonic lugs on it, but it used the 6-ply shell with the rounded bearing edges. They put a shell. They put a little badge on the underside that said "full vibrating sound shell."
I've
And
seen those.
so, yeah. So, I really don't imagine that just adding those 3 more plies, or that 3 more millimeters worth of thickness to the shell, kept it from vibrating. But it was a nice talking point.
But do you remember when they were, I forgot where this was from, but they had somewhere along the way they stated that the German Institute of something or another had done some studies and you could have a shell embedded in concrete
Yes,
and it
you could
wasn't
have
going
a shell. You had a shell made of concrete.
okay, well I got it wrong, but
Yeah.
at any rate, um I don't think that's conventional thinking anymore though. I think we've
No,
kind of moved away. And
no.
that
I think
that
they
does
probably found out that even concrete has a resonant frequency.
right.
So at some point in time, I mean, it may resist, but at some point in time, depending on where you have the heads tuned, if you were to make a drum out of concrete, or like, they had those Keplinger drums that were made out of cast iron. The same sort of idea. I mean, talk about giving yourself a hernia. That still that drum is going to end up having some sort of a resonant frequency, and thus it's going to vibrate.
Hey, I'll tell you what, I've played one up north and they had a wall, several of them on the wall. And you know what? They do their own thing for sure. So that kind of brings us back full circle. You back in the '80s, the bigger was better mentality, and Sonar applied that to the signature shells. But time moves on, the market moves on. That's the thing is you can try to rest on your laurels all you want to, but when your market share is diminishing because you're not staying with the current trend, it's like haircuts.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? I love the way women's haircuts look back in the '70s. When I look at those old
Yeah.
pictures and catalogs and stuff. But
Yep.
unfortunately, time moved on, and you have to
Well,
move on.
you know what killed that. It was the hairspray. It was the propellants in the hairspray. It was contributing to the hole in the ozone, and so they couldn't get the hairspray, the right hairspray that they needed in order to keep those big hairdos going. And once they took away that propellant, all of their hair fell flat, and so they had to come up with a new hairstyle. That's my theory, and I'm sticking to it.
It sounds good to me. Well, Scott, what have we missed on this? We're beating this dead horse back to life, or further to death, or however you want to look at it. What is there anything we haven't touched on yet?
Well, just moving forward, uh, I think we're continuing to see. Well, for one, you know, time marches on. Uh, when I was in Germany to go to the trade shows, the hotels I stayed at, when you walked in the room and you couldn't turn the lights on until you put your room key. There was this little holder on the wall, and then that ended up turning the lights on. So that you know they came up with all of these extra efficiencies. I
Hmm.
mean, it's filtered down to all of us here. I mean, here in my house, I have nothing but LED bulbs.
Right.
Back when the complex fluorescents were in vogue, I ended up changing all of the bulbs in there, and my electric bill immediately went down by $40 a month.
Hmm.
And the same thing happened when I went from the CFLs to the LEDs. So where I'm going with this is that the Germans are hypersensitive to these sorts of efficiencies. So, like the Meinl factory has solar arrays covering the entire roof of they are entirely self-sufficient with solar power at the Meinl factory in Germany. So, meaning they are either selling back to the grid or using a very, very little bit. And of course, their carbon footprint is virtually nil, which, 30 years ago, a place like that would have been, there would have been a coal-fired plant belching out, tons and tons of CO2 into the atmosphere, uh, in order to manufacture whatever it was that they were making, whether it be cymbals or hand drums or that kind of thing. And Sonor is much the same way. I don't know that they've embraced the solar aspect of it, but I do know that that's just a natural progression there in Germany, to where they end up coming up with different efficiencies, because stuff, just existing is expensive.
Yeah.
So you got to come up with ways to economize that, yet not cheapen the experience. So getting back to where are we going to put fill that hole in the product line? Well, so maybe that means we end up making a thin 3-ply beach shell with reinforcing rings, in a specific number of sizes, in a specific number of finishes, that are using parts that we've already phased out on some other lines, but we've still got boxes and boxes of them. So we end up filling that price point with that. Then when all of those parts are used up, well, maybe we've changed the lug design, or we've come up with something new for the higher end lines, as they used to do before. Coming up with something that improves upon the high end line, and so that ends up letting them use the leftover stock from that on a new lower end line. That's that's kind of like going back to, well, this is how we've always done it, but it was a good idea to always do it that way.
Mhm. Well, I tell you what, I hope somebody's getting some benefit out of this. I hope somebody's going to watch this all the way through to the end. Um,
Mhm.
but it's been very informative, I feel like, and I appreciate you doing this. And
I appreciate you asking me back. This is fun.
sure, you know what? There's other stuff we can talk about. I mean, you're so multifaceted in your knowledge and all that. We'll definitely do more of this. My reason for wanting to do this is that these are topics that have just been, you know, beat to death, really.
Mhm.
And this wasn't really so much a way to beat it to death one more time. It's just for what I'm planning to do and all that. This is not going to be a topic of conversation anymore. But here's somewhere somebody can go back if somebody doesn't understand, why can't they do this? Why don't they still do this? And why don't they do this way? Here's
Right.
the source. Here's the source of information for that. And if I'm interviewing an artist that has an opinion, I'm not going to quash their conversation. But as far as my purposes go, and for what you've always been very supportive of the company, not the brand, but the company. And
Yes. Well,
I
I
know,
understand. I understand. I mean, the reason the company exists is to make drums.
right,
It is to make drums that sell. You know,
right,
uh, sure, they could say, okay, from tomorrow on, we are only going to make reissues of the Signature Series drums and nothing else. Well, watch your market share plummet, and probably watch the company go out of business, because in order to do that, the way they would want to do that, you're going to end up having to spend 20 grand to buy a bop kit. And sure, there's a few people, Brad Cofield, who who would like that, but there aren't enough of those guys around in order to keep the company afloat.
but you know what? On the flip side of that, it's to somebody with that mentality, it sounds nice in the thought,
Mm-hmm.
but you know what? When the stores are full of them and that's all you can get, who the
Yeah.
hell's gonna? I mean, what's the value in that? The whole thing now with those older drums is that they're rare, they're different. If you could just go buy them brand new, you wouldn't want one.
Right. Right.
My one of my favorite places to eat without getting real expensive is Texas Roadhouse. And I'm
Yes.
so glad we don't have one here, because when we go out of town and we see one, I'll start salivating at the mouth. If
Right.
I was eating one every day, then now what? It wouldn't be exciting. So that's the thing is, I think the thought there is that, if they did this, I would be a buyer.
Right.
But if they actually did it, you wouldn't need to be a buyer, because you'd always have that option. It's the fact that you don't have that option that makes you want it. As soon as that option becomes available, that takes all the wind out of the sail.
Right.
That's my
Yeah.
opinion.
On top of that, say they were to go ahead and do a signature series reissue, right down to right down to spec. We're going to make it exactly the way it was before. I tend to think that that would end up devaluing the existing kits that are out there.
Oh, I
I
don't
mean,
see any
not
way. I don't see any way it
not
would.
saying no that they're not. I mean, we're looking at say a signature kit right now. If were you to assemble a just a standard hair metal kind of signature kit, a 10, 12, 13, 14, 16, 18 with a 24-inch bass drum and the big wooden snare. In order to buy that, if you I would imagine that would end up having to cost from some other collector, you'd be looking at 10, 12 grand at least, today. And if Sonor were to were to redo that, if not more, say, I mean, if it were mint, you might be looking at 15 grand. Well,
Yeah.
if Sonor were to reissue right down to the same screws and all of that stuff, and they'd have to charge, 25 grand for that, I tend to think that other kit, rather than being worth 15, would be worth 10.
Could be
And I
right.
really don't, and I don't see that really helps anybody out, other than, a short-term sugar rush. For the company, they would end up having to invest a whole lot of time and effort and engineering and thought and retooling in order to do that. And just like the Jet Set, which was the one where they were going to make 25 sets, and if you bought one, they would end up sending you a plane ticket to come to Germany to pick it up. I think they planned for 25, and I don't think they sold 10. And I think it would be the same thing if were they to do that again. It's a nice idea, but it
Right.
really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Not especially when you can get exactly what you want with the configurator, and you can tell it. Like I say, the only option that I really wish that they would make available on the configurator is the old long lugs, like on the Highlight and the Force 3000s. If they were to do that, I would be absolutely just tickled pink.
If they would offer like metal drum shells on there, I
Mm-hmm.
would probably have a stack of metal sonar, or excuse me, sonar. Hey, you know what? Let me go back to the sonar thing.
Mm-hmm.
I've been saying sonar since '85.
Right.
And what I've decided I'm going to do, because I've had conversation with people that are saying sonar, I'm just going to adapt to whoever I'm talking to. So when I'm talking to
Yeah.
you, it's sonar. When I'm talking
Yeah.
to everybody else on the entire freaking planet, it's gonna, and I say that lovingly, okay?
Yes.
But
Yes. Yeah. Well, like there was a promotional video that they put out uh, in the late '80s, I guess, where they were showing how they hand laid up the shells, and they ended up laying out the veneer, and they ended up putting a thread on the back of it to hold the veneer together while they glued it around the shell on it. And the guy that was the announcer, the narrator, he said, and so at Sonor, we end up using, the finest quality Bubinga, and whatever, but at Sonor, and then other people. So I finally got to meet Carl, and I'm in Germany. And Carl was the managing director of Sonor there in Aue in Germany. And how did he say Sonor? He said Sonor. So, and he ended up learning it from the grandfather of, I said it before, he learned it from the grandfather of the founder. So if Carl said Sonor, it's Sonor.
So that just begs the question. And again, I'm being playful here. Do you pronounce all of your words the same way Carl does?
Yes, I even say vintage
I
and Volkswagen.
like that. My first car was one of those.
Uh-huh.
Well, Scott, this has been fun and hopefully informative to some people. And we'll do this again soon. Just pick a topic and let me know when you're available. And Monday, I'm recording a podcast that I'm going to release the first week of January, and people just don't have any idea how excited they should be about it.
Oh, I'm sure that, yeah, I'm sure you're absolutely right. If who you're going to be talking to is who I think it is.
It
Absolutely.
probably is. It probably is. Um, yep. So anyway, it's going to be a big year. For the company, for all of us in the Sonor family. I'm going to start referring to us as the Sonor family. I had a conversation with somebody a few days ago. And yeah, I talked about the fact that I kind of flipped companies for a little while for a couple of different reasons.
Mhm.
And he just kept referring to it as a family, and you don't always get along with everybody in your family,
Oh,
you know,
absolutely.
you and I couldn't be any different on certain things in life.
Right.
But you know what? We know how to push that crap aside and have a conversation about our common interest.
For sure. For
And
sure.
that's one thing about the family is that sometimes you may run hot and cold with somebody, or somebody may be in and out or whatever. But
Yeah.
you know what? At the end of the day, we're all here for a common reason, and I think that the family has a lot to look forward to coming up.
I agree. And you bringing that, just that particular point, reminded me. Uh, I ended up doing a history seminar at Honer USA in Richmond. Larry Nelson hired me to come in, and that particular time, Carl was there along with Michael. My gosh, I can't remember Michael's last name, and I'm sorry, Michael, if you end up seeing this. He he has since left Sonar and runs a sailboarding company in Berlin called What's Up Berlin. So he's on Facebook. So if you happen to be into sailboarding or are interested in it, look up on Facebook What's Up Berlin. But anyway, so I was in the midst of doing my history seminar, talking about, the company was founded in 1875, and Johannes Link, a leather tanner, and started making drums, blah blah blah. And at some point in time, I ended up referring to in my said, and at this time we started making, and Carl kind of chuckled. We, huh? And Larry said, well, the Sonor aficionados, the Sonor guys, consider themselves part of the family, and there definitely is that brotherhood, and,
Absolutely.
and Carl agreed with that. So I thank Larry for bailing me out of at that point of time of out of a little thing that might have been could have been a little embarrassing at the time, but Carl ended up agreeing. The fact that we are a loyal and a voracious bunch who we will go down fighting for
Yeah,
for the drums we love and the company that we admire.
absolutely. Very fanatical bunch for sure, and passionate.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and I think that's why there used to be the flare-ups there were on the museum and all that, because we are, in very strong-minded,
Yeah, you might not always agree with every move or every product that they come out with, but there's always rhyme behind the reason behind the rhyme, so to
Right.
speak.
Right.
And I appreciate the fact that there again, they're a company that has to respond to the needs of today's market. They can honor yesterday's market. They ended up doing that with when they introduced the vintage series. I was so absolutely pleased when they came out with that. And there again, I had made some noise, a few years earlier, on the message board, and you know what you need to do some sort of an homage, or if at all, just with the old '50s logo, and they ended up going full force with the teardrop lugs and the staggered and the whole thing. And I
Square square
right off,
lugs. Square lugs.
you know, yeah, I guess one thing that Carl pointed out to me is that every time that they end up doing a design just to have the mold made is like 15,000 euros, which kind of makes sense as to why Ludwig still uses the same classic lug that they've used since the 1930s.
It's a great looking lug.
Yeah, it's a great looking lug, but at the same time, it's paid for. The only time they end up having to redo the mold is when the old one gets worn out.
But you know what? They have offered the mini lugs. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
so they have at some point added another option.
But interestingly enough, Sonor, therefore, for a period of about 20 years, was changing their lug design about every 3 or 4 years. And Larry at the at Honer USA used to complain a bit about it because it was like, God, we've got to, now here's another product that we end up having to keep in stock in order to, to satisfy the need for repairs. Should that old 3003 lug break, and we've already moved on to the 3007. And then immediately after that, 2 years later, they ended up coming out with the lugs that they used on the Ascent and the Select Force and those things. That was that one where it was, the single mounting point with the little curve thing coming down there,
Right.
which was not a good design because I ended up seeing a lot of them end up breaking.
Right. There's been one within the last few days on one of the Facebook pages where a guy's
Mm-hmm.
trying to find replacements.
Yeah.
And the way they keep changing the specs with the hole spacings and all that,
Mm-hmm.
they're not interchangeable unless you want to go start drilling holes.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, there is wisdom that you notice they have kind of settled down, like you said, kind of gone on cruise control to a point with stuff like that over the last 10 years or so. And in that case, it just makes sense. It's expensive to retool. It's expensive to do that. And especially when there really is not much benefit on the other side of it. I mean, if they're coming out with something that is inherently better on the other side, then yeah, but change just for the sake of changing it, not so much.
Right. What else?
Okay, I think we've both probably sucked all of the oxygen out of the room.
I think so. I was going to square off with you about the square-headed rods, but I'm going to just let that go.
Mm-hmm.
I had my day of being a slotted rod guy. And for me, everything, it's easy to find a drum kit. And my favorite drum kit, I'm not going to mention the name. It's not even a Sonor, unfortunately, but it's got a nice balance to it. I can
Right.
use that one drum key and get tension rods out just about as fast as I can with a drill.
Yeah.
But this did tie into one more thing though, and I wonder if for some people the slotted rod thing is an identity kind of thing.
Oh,
When
absolutely,
when you when
absolutely.
yeah yeah
Every new Sonar drum that I have, well, every new SQ2 that I have ordered, I've ordered with slotted rods just because they're different. You
right
know, why be the same as everybody else? I mean, I understand the reason they went to it
right
because it was actually costing them sales. Some people were, they would overlook all of the rest of the benefits of the engineering just because it had those funny rods on there. Okay, so you there again, time marches on. You respond to the wants and demands of the market,
right
and that's fine. And there is a demand in the market to maintain the slotted rods. I just wish that they would make them an option on the lesser, like on the vintage series. It seems like a no-brainer that the vintage series should have slotted rods at least as an option.
Well, you know what? I'll tell you this. Last year, when I went up north, I'm being vague with information here.
Hmm.
I had a presentation I was going to pitch at one point. Basically, what that was for the Sonor stuff. I was going to pitch that we have packages available. So if you ordered a stand, 10, 12, 14, 16, 22, and you wanted to go slotted, if it was something that was in stock and square and you wanted slotted, guess what? We can send that out additional, or we can swap it out before we ship or whatever, and vice
Right,
versa.
right.
If we so the options there either way. So I'm just what my point is, that is actually something that could be dealt with on the dealer level because the
Yeah,
parts
at
are
the
there to
dealer
do
level.
it. The parts are there to
Kind of
do it.
like back in the days when you would end up getting dealer installed air conditioning
Right.
or or different hot rod kind of things added to your car that weren't economical for them to do at the factory. I mean, I understand. I mean, with the SQ2, everything is custom, right down to, you know, it would not surprise me if there's an option, or if there would be an option to have the choice of what color screws you get to attach the lugs to the rod, because you're using clear heads and you want to have either a dark screw to match a dark veneer or a light screw to match a light veneer, something like that. That would
Yeah.
not surprise me if that ended up becoming a thing,
Right.
but it's not economical to do when, on a mass produced level.
Right. But then
So
again, that goes back to, options would options be available from whoever you're buying from,
mhm,
or whatever. And the SQ2 being custom built as it is, you can, like you say, you can get the slotted or square or whatever. But for the people, I thought it'd be a good idea to have pre-packs of the,
mhm,
because of the fact you got some dealers that have got 3 dozen SQ2s in stock, and
yeah,
so for the customer who wants their product now and likes this drum set, well, I like it, but I'd rather have the slotted rods.
yeah.
And
Well,
myself.
that's the whole idea behind the lesser lines. They end up narrowing down the choices, and
Mhm.
they narrow down the choices of the finishes. They come up with one shell makeup, uh, and so they'll end up just making 12, 13, 10, 12, 13, a 14, a 16, a 22, or a 20, or something like that, just in this one kind of shell, and just in these 5 different finishes, just
Mhm.
because there's economy of scale. And so they can
Sure.
tell the factory, okay, after you get done doing that batch of SQ2s, I want you to do these uh, makeup 10 delight kits, the standard blah 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 in this finish, and they can just wham 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 wham. I mean, not like it happens that way, because they still have to hand lay up the shells. They still have to hand paint them. They still have to hand polish them,
Right.
all of those things. But it ends up cutting out a lot of the time and a lot of the labor involved. And that's the big expense, not necessarily the cost of slotted rods versus square rods. Although I'm sure that the square rods are sourced from China, and I know for a fact that the slotted rods are made by a company right across the street from the factory in Germany.
Really, I didn't know that.
Yeah, or at least they were the last time I was at the factory. That's what Carl told me.
In I'm not trying to beat the slotted rod thing to death. I'm just, I have my own perspective about things, and I think it kind of plays into what we're talking about.
Yeah,
To me, the slotted rods would be more viable if, the 600 series hardware came with slotted, either all or nothing.
right,
It's really not an advantage. Um,
right.
but it, but
I
it,
know what you're saying. So like on the memory locks, then it should have then the memory locks should have. Oh, this one doesn't have one. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, I get it.
it should have a slotted a slotted
Yeah,
screw as opposed to the square screw.
because if you're sitting there with a slotted key in your pocket and something goes amiss with your
Yeah.
gear and you're having to lock down, on the fly, um, it just makes it
Oh yeah.
inconvenient when
Oh
you're.
yeah. It's come back to bite me several times. For some reason, I had taken my drum key off of my car key ring, and I got to a gig, and I needed to tighten down. Well, I needed a square key in order to tighten things down, and I didn't have a square key. So I ended up having to use a pair of pliers that I had in there, and I ended up chewing the things up
Well,
badly.
sometimes you can, if you happen to have one, if you've got a long socket, like
Mhm,
deep socket, the
mhm.
1/4 inch drive on that usually works if you can get it to fit between the hoop and the.
Right.
But and another and this is at your expense, but I say this again playfully. But
Yes.
you on the museum used to comment about being able to tune your drums with a quarter. I'm thinking, a lot of bass drum pedals have a clip-on drum key. Some thrones have a drum key underneath. You probably got a glove box. You could stick 4 or 5 drum. If you show up to a
Oh
gig
yeah.
without a drum key,
Oh yeah. It's like somebody on Facebook on one of the Sonar groups was looking for one of the double keys, the little
yeah,
L-shaped one.
yeah.
And I was just about ready to say, yeah, I've got about five of them here.
I know the one you because the guy, yeah, yeah. I saw what you're talking about because he's trying to not get them from Europe.
Yeah,
Right, I
which
saw that.
which which seems crazy, but there again, that might just be something they aren't shipping over here
I
anymore.
think they're here. I just think dealers aren't getting them. And
Yeah,
then they've got the newer key that's got on one end it's got a square, and other it's got a slotted. The slotted doesn't fit older slotted rods,
right, right.
which
I,
kind of
I have
makes you
noticed.
wonder why would you do
Well,
that?
it's like if you had a teardrop kit, from the '60s or the '50s, and you took your regular Sonar slotted key from the '80s or on that, and you went to use it, it wouldn't fit because the tongue in there in the middle was too thick.
Yeah.
So I ended up taking one. I took some pliers and squeezed the ring so I could get the ring off, and then I filed that flat piece down until it would fit, and then put the ring back on there. And God only knows what happened to that key.
Well, 30 minutes ago we thought we'd covered everything,
Yeah, I
and
know.
and we've
And
we've
yeah, we've killed just about 2 hours now.
yeah. So I'll ask you for the third time. Have we missed anything?
No, no,
Oh,
no,
okay.
no. We've not missed anything. It's time to take this out. I will ask your indulgence at some point in time in the near future because uh, for years now I've had a YouTube channel, Sonar Museum, which I've only ended up posting a few of my band videos, and I think I ended up posting a couple uh, of the factory propaganda videos on there.
Right.
And so I already have an existing channel there, and I will probably we'll end up reversing this so that I can talk to you about whatever and post it to the Sonar Museum channel.
That'd be fine with me. I think this is a good idea on a couple of levels. I'd be, very welcome to that. Plus, I'm a very patient guy, so if for some reason you're having problems getting something working on your end,
Mhm.
you don't have some hot artist trying to get on stage waiting on you to figure out how to operate your software. So
Right.
sorry about that, by the way.
That's me.
Well, I did it today.
Well, you did what the prompts told you to do, and that's what I do. And then when the prompts don't work, oh well,
Well, it
time has
turned out on my end, it turned out to be a simple fix to that. I hope I don't forget it for Monday. I don't want to be sitting here fumbling around
write it down
with
on a post-it note and stick it on your monitor.
that's a good idea. All right. Well, look here. As far as I'm concerned, this is all put to bed now. I'm
Okay.
not. My channel's not going to rehash this mess anymore. This is the end of all this. 2025 is just right around the corner, and it's going to be a great year. My channel should be very busy. Scott, sounds like you're about to get some wind in your sails again with some stuff, and I think that it's going to be a fun ride.
I think so too. Again, thanks for asking me to be on your channel,
Absolutely.
and we'll have a symbiotic relationship from here on out. I can see.